And not every fact is truth. Every Wednesday, 10 p.m. on your public broadcaster.
All on your public broadcaster, UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. Today we look at something very critical, closer to home for anyone in this country that is trying to develop or try to transform the education of this country. Education can break or make a nation. As Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon. We look at graduations and even today, technical schools getting their results. We also see PLE results coming through. What does that mean for our education system? There is an education to what is happening. It was instituted in 2021. But also the curriculum we have, bits of it came in the 1800s. Changes need to be made. Are we still relevant in the current times? You can be part of the conversation, join the panel that is here. But let me get to the panel before I give you more details of what our discussion will look like. On the extreme end, he's no stranger in spheres everywhere finance education. He is Professor Dr. Suruma Ezra, was once a Minister of Finance, also former Chancellor of Makerere University. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, viewers. Good evening.
It's good to have you again.
Thank you very much.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
He is no stranger to discussing anything controversial, but also constructive on how this country moves forward. Professor Ndebesa Mwambusia is a historian, but also a don of history at Makerere University. Good evening, sir.
Good evening to you, and good evening to the viewers.
It's good to have you, Professor.
Thank you.
Next to him, the two gentlemen that are there, it is their maiden appearance here on Behind the Headlines. We're joined by Dr. Richard Irumba, who is the acting director at the National Curriculum Development Center. He's here with us to give us perspective, especially on what curriculum we're doing and what projections transformation will be taking in the near future. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Timothy. Good evening, viewers.
If you have heard of anything wanting to change and transform education in this country, Victoria University, but also a propagator of transformational education in this country and the region. Good evening, sir.
Wonderful evening to you, Timothy, to our viewers. Good evening. Thank you for tuning in this evening.
Thank you very much. In a short while, we'll be joined by Professor Sarah Sali, who is a dean at the School of Gender and Women's Studies at Makerere University, and she'll be also bringing perspective here. Today I have professors and doctors. By the time the night ends, I might be knighted in some way or another. Join the show on 0709 60 25 92. Drop your text or WhatsApp there, or go to our X platform, hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines. Let us know what you think. In one way or another, this education discussion is critical on where the direction of our country goes. Let me start with the gentlemen that are here, since I have a manner for now. Professor Dr. Suruma, you were at the helm of Makerere University. You had the pinnacle of having a view of what our education looked like. Last week, this week, come tomorrow, MOBS will be taking some kids to graduate there. As the numbers show, 12,000 plus were graduating. Where is our education as a country?
So where is our education?
Where is our education as a country?
As a culture?
As a country.
As a country. That's probably too big a question for anyone to answer.
Two titles can cover it.
As you said at the beginning, it is of course true that our education is inherited. Empire, and when I was in secondary school at Budo, virtually all my teachers were British. So they taught me what they thought I needed to know or should know. I'm not sure if I can say that that's what I needed to know, but I didn't have a say about it. Now, I have not followed the changes that have taken place in the curriculum over time. We have a curriculum specialist maybe he will tell us. But my preliminary view to change the content of education for two reasons. One, that our ideology as a country has changed from, or should have changed from, the colonial ideology. And so our definition of what needs to be ideology as Uganda as a country, in terms of employment, in terms of the character of our population, what kind of people we want to be. Secondly, technology has changed so much that whether we like it or not, we have to change the way we teach. The old approach to knowledge, as memorizing and regurgitating, oh, sorry for that bad word, but reproducing, copying and being like a photocopier, that kind of education, in my view, is no longer useful. We need to change. It's no longer a question of memorizing. It's a question of creativity. It's a question of employment and employability and innovation, so that we are able to produce a population which is more productive in terms of income, but also the quality of life is very, very important. We want to produce men and women who have a high quality of life and a sense of law and order and peace in the country. So that's a mouthful, but I think the quality of life, the standard of living, all of these are the basis for what we call knowledge. And if the knowledge we are giving to the children and to the students at Makerere and so on is not helping the graduates to have a high standard of living and to have a quality of life that we would say is a high standard of life, then we are not successful in our education. And the way I see our country now, I believe that we have a great deal of improvement to make.
And thank you very much, Dr. Suruma, especially on the point of content there. I'll be getting back to you on that one. But Professor Ndebesa, looking at a report that came out by World Bank, talking about the workload and not technology, public schools need to be privatized, scrapping PLE, and also went on to talk about the lack of quality assurance. 35% of the ones who are coming from primary school are only getting to S1 to S4, and 19% of that is getting to A level there. There was a commission by Honorable Amanya Mshega between 1987 to 1989 for 2.5 years to review education. We're getting back to that in 2021. Give us a perspective of both commissions and what you see with our education system in the country.
Thank you. You started your question by referring to the World Bank, which sometimes we call the Knowledge Bank. Is that education, for the purpose of education generally, we used to say it is to impart skills, knowledge, values, and attitudes. These days, imparting is a bad word, especially in the competence-based curriculum. They are talking about facilitating knowledge, production or knowledge, values, skills, and attitudes. Now, the World Bank perspective may not be our perspective, because we have to customize those ideas that are generated from the Western, and not have experiences of the first world or the Western world, but we didn't need to bring them here wholesale. We have to graft them onto our own. Particularly why I wouldn't want to go for wholesale for the World Bank is that Uganda is a young nation. We are state building. Now, the purpose of education is not necessarily to improve the individual. Let nobody get me wrong that it is not to improve the individual, but I'm saying it's not the only one. It is to improve the individual. It is to improve the society the individual is living in. It is also to improve the nation. So we are still state building and nation building. And therefore our education should be tailored to nation building. It should not only be tailored to the employment labor market, but also state building. I know the likes of the World Bank would want education that is tailored to the labor market, employability. That is to benefit the individual only. But the education is not only to benefit the individual, it is also to benefit society, it is to benefit the economy. So we need to understand the context in which our education is planned. So our education should aim at equality, because if you don't have equal access to education, you end up having a country, a state with two peoples.
Haves and have-nots.
The haves and the have-nots. As it is shown when the results are out for either primary or secondary, you find certain regions actually don't have good grades and other regions have good grades. That means our education is not providing equality of access. That's one. But two, it should be quality. Quality according to who? You don't have to follow the quality as in the Western world. We need education that facilitates technology, but technology in our context. We need values. Even the Western world, by the way, is missing out on values and attitudes. You know the crisis of society in England. This whole notion of Brexit is lack of, I think, education for global citizenship. They are trying to cocoon themselves into a tribal group. And even among them, the Irish are fighting each other. You go to America, you find people shooting, students, pupils, learners shooting each other. That we don't have to follow that education. So we need certain values that promote harmony, that promote Uganda today, or at this juncture. Uganda used to be ahead of our colleagues in the East African region, Kenya and Tanzania. Today, it is said that we are behind them. And even labor productivity of Kenya and Tanzania is ahead of our labor productivity, according to different studies. So we need to provide quality education. But besides quality education and access, equal access, we need to have education for nation building, for state building. So education is supposed to benefit the individual, but it is also supposed to benefit society. I think some people, I find, get it wrong when they insist on employability, on labor, on the labor market, and things like that. That, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it shouldn't do, but we should also look at education that is nation building, that is state building at this juncture when Uganda is not yet a nation state.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let me come to you, Dr. Richard. In the 1800s, we inherited the curriculum, bits of it that we have right now. 2020, March there, for the ones that are in O-level, supposedly now they're in S3. What is the lifespan of the curriculum?
Thank you, Timothy. The curriculum transformation in this country, Professor Suruma put it quite well, that the curriculum we have been implementing in the country for a very long period was inherited from our colonial masters. So some of the curricula are as old as 1950s, 1960s. And they are not matching the current society needs and expectations. So as a country, we embarked on a journey of transforming the curricula which guides the education system in this country. As you have put it, in 2020, we rolled out what we call the lower secondary curriculum, or the competence-based curriculum, where the emphasis is on learning by doing, as opposed to the colonial system, as Professor Suruma put it, which was knowledge-based, emphasizing reproduction of knowledge. And that's the system which many of us have gone through in this country. So that journey started in 2020, and the Pioneer Group are now in Senior 4 in 2024, and they will be sitting their examinations at the end of this year. But we have been improving, whereas the curriculum is old for all across different levels, but over time we have been improving it. We have not had, I could say, a major shift like the one we had in 2020, but for example, the primary school curriculum was reviewed in 1997. The A-level curriculum, we have embarked on the process of reviewing it as well as primary school curriculum. Then we have also developed curricula for technical vocation and educational training programs. So we have been reviewing them over time, but the major changes in terms of the philosophy, approach, the form and the structure of the curriculum, we embarked on that starting in 2020, and we are continuing with the journey. We started with lower secondary, we are going to A-level, and we have also started on the process of reviewing the primary school curriculum.
But Dr. Richard, what is the lifespan of the curriculum? And also, you are seemingly putting the cart before the horse. You're in the middle. Primary school, 97. And you have alluded it to very well, saying, it's not matching the current times. When do we expect of a curricula?
The lifespan, sorry, I had missed that. The lifespan under normal conditions should be about 5 years. That's the ideal situation. That after every 5 years, the curriculum is expected to be reviewed. But many times, especially in developing countries, we do not have all the resources required to review the curriculum as frequent as it should be. So that's why, for example, you can see that like the primary school curriculum was developed in 1997, and right now it's more than 16, 17 years. We are starting the process of review. The secondary school curriculum had not been reviewed for more than 25 years. So because of insufficient resources, you find that it's not practical to review the curriculum as frequent as it should be.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Dr. Lawrence. Professor, looking at, let me not get into some of the things that I have heard you say, also the studies that you've had with the Education Commission. I'm going to come to that. But Colin Powell said something that was interesting. There's a quote that goes, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But he says those are excuses, it causes arrogance, and it's also... Okay. And how can it be fixed?
Thank you very much, Timothy. If you clearly followed responses from Professor Suluma, Professor Ndebesa, and Dr. Irumba, you definitely pick an answer that I needed even not to emphasize that it is broken. Indeed, it is broken. We can do better. As a metaphor, if you asked, for example, I'm sure he would be very generous with his responses, Professor Suluma or Professor Ndebesa, and you asked them the cars they used to see or drive in the 1980s, okay? If they looked at the street today for the last 20 years, if they can actually see any car moving around. That means if they are not there, if cars keep on changing and everything around ourselves keeps changing, what stops education that actually molds people who are supposed to fix these cars from changing? Now, again, let me put this, your probing or your question to something else. If you look at, again, I'm going to invoke two institutions that are very famous. Professor Suluma is a renowned economist, and we have Professor Ndebesa, and we have a scholar here, Dr. Nasali, Professor Nasali, Sali, and my colleague here, Dr. Irumba. If you look at a recent study published by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and we know that they did this together with the Oxford Economics Africa. And they were looking at the human capital and productive employment creation on the African continent, trying to study the gap between Africa and the rest of the developed world. The only thing they found out is that that gap is actually quadrupling for now. Now, if it is quadrupling, they said that of 35 to 76. Okay, 8%. Okay? And if you look at the number of years stays in school, it is 5 years on average. The rest of the world is 11 years. So is our education system broken? It is broken. It is not taking us where we are supposed to go. And we need, like everyone else said, we need to do something about it. And it is not even now. We ought to have done it. If you hear a curriculum that has been taken as long as 25 years to be reviewed, with all the changes you have had technologically, like the jobs we have lost because of technology and a new wave of emerging technologies that are coming in, and we are not reviewing a curriculum or ourselves down. And we need to do something about it very, very quickly.
Thank you very much. Professor Sarah, you and I come from the eastern part. Let me make it to a layman who is watching us. If we're on a journey from here to Busia, it's a journey. If this is our education system, what is the problem that we're still on the road 5 hours later? And not even halfway.
Thank you very much, Timothy, and good evening, viewers. Good evening, fellow panelists. I think the analogy of ginger and the wussy is a little bit complicated. But I think following what the rest have said, I think we also need to be a little bit critical when we say what the education system is and its problems. Because I think just treating the usual popular version is also going to be problematic and won't take us very far. For starters, I agree with what everybody has said, but I think we need to delve deeper. The colonial master left in 1962. Curriculum takes 5 to 25 years to review. To what extent is the colonial master still a problem? That is one. When you read books on the purpose of education, you'll get different feelings, but they rotate around two things: producing the workforce of tomorrow and also producing the citizens of the future. So what that then guides you is that education has to be informed by the material conditions of the context in which the system is running, okay? And incidentally, even those we blame for having brought us that kind of education, which was standard at their time, have long moved on. We are stuck where, and by the way, I also want to disagree that we are stuck with where they left us. We have changed and we have over-innovated the education system. The problem is, what is our basis for innovating? When a child in Europe or in the US is being educated, or the curriculum is being set, it is set within the material conditions in which that child exists. For example, I can give an innovation which occurred 2 years ago, I think, where you have a child in Germany, a student in Germany, a university student, who is, if you've been to Europe, you know when you go through the train stations, this thing where you have to prove that you paid, and the turn dial. And because thousands of people go through the turn dial at a certain train station in Europe, so that this student is thinking of a way to convert power from that turn dial. And indeed, he can convert power. His proof of concept worked. The problem with us is to look at that and want to do exactly that here, where there is no turn dial. And that is not very much a colonial problem. That is very much, except maybe if you look about from the decolonial perspective, that is very much us failing to locate our education system from within our material conditions. And that's a decision we have to make as a people. Exactly. What do we want to do ideologically? What does Uganda need? Okay? And so that is one. We have talked a lot about colonial education system. By the way, it was more practical than we have today. It was very much informed by, if people were doing agriculture, they actually went to the gardens and dug. It was very practical. It was very vocational. You had these subjects called domestic science and all those kinds of things. They were very, very practical, okay? Of course, once in a while, those who did history and the rest studied Napoleon, the geographers started the Pampas and the rest. But what we are trying to do as competence-based was actually there. Ask what your parents studied and those who studied soon after them at lower level. They didn't do what we are doing today. What is it we are doing today? We are suffering from the consequences of neoliberalism, where education ceased to be a thing of producing the citizen of tomorrow to an economic commodity where anyone can invest in, and then you take a loan based on it, then you have to rush to produce the kids out, and then how do these schools brand? Ours has computer, our kids are on the internet, our kids, so just look at the branding of schools. Ours teach an international curriculum, it's GCSEs. When they come from here, they go to Canada, they go. So it is we as the people who have chosen to look outward than to look within, okay? And then what did we do? We got all our vocational institutions to progressively turned them into universities. Is that the right ratio? When you look in other parts of the world, they tell that it's high-level elite education like university is 13%. Then you should have a lot of other skills that feed into that. So you have a country where you can hardly find a good plumber, you can hardly find a good welder. Just look at the people who are within the oil wells, where they tell you even a forklift driver has to be imported, okay? And so education needs to be matched with the human resource needs of the country. But that requires us to define what are the human resource needs. If as an individual, we the elites are thinking about taking our kids to excel elsewhere, then there will be a problem because we are not educating them for here. Okay, of course, we shall struggle with that. But then, of course, then you come to us in the university level, we have two identities. We have the identity of being locally relevant, but also globally competitive. So that identity also disturbs us. But it is an identity we have to find the right balance. So I think we need to, while we blame what we have today as having come from the colonial thing, we also have to historicize. And I can assure, even when some of us were in primary, it was fairly practical. Something occurred with the neoliberal era, where you have to pack as many kids as you can get. That's where you have, like right now we have had PLE results. You're going to soon have senior 4 and senior 6. There are these schools where everyone gets in the 90s. It defies the normal distribution curve, okay? Why? Because those students who are perceived to be slow learners are not allowed to do the exam from that school. The school doesn't want them to be associated with them. So you pay the fees in that school, but then the child is taken to sit from another school which is not considered to be that, so that this school will brand as 98% of our kids get a first grade. And then that, of course, pushes pressure. Then the parents are running to join that school because the school which does magic. It's not the magic. It is the children are gifted differently. I hope on a sad note you saw the child who burnt himself yesterday, and he has 85% burns because he did not get a 4. But you see, a 4 is not destiny, okay? The child could have, whatever he got, could have been sufficient to push him through. So I think we over-liberalized the sector, we over-commoditized it, and that is what is responsible for what we are doing, and that also catches up with the universities, so everyone is reinventing. You go, you see what is in Europe, you try to do it here. At the end of the day, it may not be very, very relevant here. But of course, there is the other side, which we shall not go into, that if you don't have an economy to absorb what you're producing, you may be tempted to think maybe the education sector is the problem. But I think the two sides of the coin have to go together. How do we solve the demand side and the production side, the supply side?
And I'm glad you've mentioned that. Just a follow-up question. You and I sat here a while back and discussed the education system in Finland and what happens there, but also looking at how they've adopted it. How do we transform, especially today as somewhere, and the school was advertising how many 4s it had gotten, just like you're saying. How do we change that mindset or come to what Professor Ndebesa was saying, values and attitudes, for you to know that, like the members of parliament, it's not do or die to enter parliament, neither is it do or die to get a 4.
I don't know about the members of parliament, but anyway, why do people struggle for the 4s and the 5s and the 6s? Because those are the most of the cutoff. If your child has a 4 or a 5 or a 6, you're not going to struggle very much to get them into school, okay? So every parent wishes the best for their children. So you want to put them through a track which gives them some of the best advantage in case they are to go. And I know many people look at the right secondary school so that they can get onto government scholarship, which is also the other way secondary schools brand. That you see, if you bring them to us, chances are that many of them will do science and they'll get on a government scholarship at university. So the parents are responding to that because that's how the system has been nurtured for the last 30 years of neoliberalism. That at the end of the day, everyone must go through this term. First of all, the jobs reduced because government really downsized the jobs. So the jobs which are being produced are the ones in the private sector, which are not as many, but are also skewed because when the industries we attract are bringing end user assembling other than the actual production, which would have absorbed our labor force. So the absorption levels are very limited. So now a parent of a child today is sincerely and justifiably saying, how do I give my child a competitive advantage in the world? So we have evolved a system where if you get to the 4 and then you get to the 6 and 6 and then you get to the 25, chances are that you'll be luckier than one who got a 12 and then struggled and got maybe 20 at senior 4. But it is because as a system, as a ministry, we have narrowed on one kind of education system. But nothing stops us from exploring with the vocationals and the skills, because people may not get 4s, but they could be successful on another track. So the system has reproduced itself, and I think that's why we have bodies like the NCDC and the ministry to try and change that. And I think that's why we have competence-based.
And I'll come to competence when I get to Dr. Richard there. Professor, you have mentioned, especially when you recently met the Education Commission, on the different reforms you were thinking about. What reforms are you suggesting first and foremost? But also give us a hint of the 51 countries you have done studies about in recommendations you have made.
Okay. Now, you have to look at this the way Professor Sarah actually put it, contextualizing it with where we are today, and even the meager resources that we are operating with on a daily basis. If you know you are in Uganda, that we have teachers who really we can do better with them in terms of their welfare, right? We have schools that some of them don't have the best learning environment in terms of structures that we are looking for. Now, and then you have also national examinations running around the country. And you also know how much money they can also command. So if you're prioritizing quality education, where do you put your money? Well knowing that research is very, very clear, which is evident for everyone, that national exams for primary education, PLE, and O-level, senior for UCE, we can do without them. And we can actually, you mentioned here, you have been discussing with Professor Sarah, Finland, Sweden, Canada, Australia, Netherlands. I can go on and go on and go on. Those kids in those economies, those countries, have never seen a national exam. Now, what those economies have done, they have diverted their dollars, euros, whichever currency they are using, in our situation, our shilling, into empowering the teacher to have the capacity, to be motivated enough, those resources, such that they can handle continuous assessment that is happening within their very, very jurisdictions. So now, if you ask me the kind of recommendations I've given to Honorable Mushega's commission, I have said that for the sake of really wishing our country the best, we have better research we can rely on. We don't even have to reinvent the wheel. It is there for us to really look at it. And it is not even something that is cut and paste. No, it is something that is going to work for our own communities. Let's scrap PLE, UCE, and someone is going to say, oh, what is education without exams? Okay?
Because that's all we know.
That is what we know. You started by saying that if education makes or breaks a country. Okay? And you quoted Colin Powell as well, saying if it is not broken, don't do what?
Don't fix it.
We know it is broken, so we have to fix it. And the problem is that I heard His Excellency when he was addressing, I think NAM or G77, he put this very clearly, that this thinking of a uni-ideological kind of thinking, that there is only one way of doing things, it is actually killing our country. So exams can go. We may struggle, true, to really implement continuous assessment. We may also struggle to prioritize our teachers such that they are well paid, they are well facilitated to carry on this mantle now. But we have to start from somewhere. And now the other important thing, again, Professor Sarah put it very clearly, that can we look within ourselves when we are delivering this education? Now, think about this situation, Timothy. And it has been alluded to by the professors here, and even Dr. Irumba, who is in charge of curriculum development. Why, for God's sake, would you bother a child in Karamoja, whose daily life is to maybe perhaps face hunger, face drought, and maybe some economic opportunities, knowing that there's some gold somewhere in Karamoja, and maybe theft of their cows or something like that. And then you expect them to sit an exam or engulf themselves in a curriculum that is telling them how actually there are slums in Katwe, how there are floods in Waise. Okay? So look at that scenario. Now, that's where I proposed. Is it possible? Could it be feasible for us? And Dr. Irumba can really tell us, because they are the ones that can make this happen. Can we create school districts? Okay, when I say school districts, I'm not saying that every district in this country should become a school district. I am saying look at regions, jurisdictions, places that share share the same opportunities, share the same socio-economic challenges, share the same needs, and then group them together and let them be a school district, and then have a curriculum that addresses their opportunities, their needs, their everything in that particular school district. And then the country may have as many as 30, 20 or something like that. When you aggregate all of them, students minding their own business, what she clearly said, that when you hear competence-based education or competence-based learning curriculum, it is what we used we used to call it indigenous African education, where we learned by doing. So therefore, if you teach a child within their environment, understand their problems on a daily basis, and try to craft solutions that take them out of those problems, and then play with their opportunities, and then become more creative. You know how they become more creative? When you remove an exam that does not tolerate risks. You can't take a risk with an exam, because the teacher gave you 100%, he expects 100% back. If you fail to give them 100%, you give them 30, then you are sure that you're going to get that baptism of letter F, or now there is a new one of U. Ungraded. So if you got rid of those things, a child now will be ready to take some risks, will start innovating, will start creating. We have had kids in India who are now aspiring to cure death. Okay, how do you even become so brave to think that you're going to cure death and you are in high school? So you are giving a child to start becoming forward-looking, forward-thinking.
Dr. Lawrence, and I'm glad you've spoken about India before
Yes.
I come to Dr. Irumba. You've spoken about India. And Professor said something about having the local context, but also with the global view. The challenge with such is that a state like Bangalore has no global view, especially when Professor or myself go there and really they're thinking Uganda is a whole Africa country. That global view is lacking. Won't that be the effect of what you're suggesting?
Okay. Now let's also think about what actually brings us to be one global village. Okay, so who is losing so much? If I have obsessed myself with understanding what my community is all about and what it needs, and I start actually delivering what my community needs, than obsessing myself with what is happening in the United States. When will I ever live in the United States? Are we also going to migrate, all of us, and go to United States? Why don't we start with home?
Actually, our challenge is we are very much abroad.
Exactly. Now, why is it that Dr. Irumba and the amazing technical people that they have cannot craft a curriculum that addresses three things: local relevance, regional relevance, and global relevance?
Dr. Lawrence,
They can do that, right? If we can only create school districts that keep a child, if you are in Western Uganda, if you're studying math, you can add 5 cows with 5 cows, and then say 10 cows actually. You are looking at things
that are practical.
Yes, you are not actually thinking that actually milk comes from a fridge. No, it comes from a cow.
Dr. Lawrence, let me come back to you, and I'm glad we'll expound on that. Dr. Richard, coming to you, what is this competence-based education, and why did you choose to start on the lower level of O level, and not primary school, and not pre-primary, not preschool, and not even think above that?
Thank you, Timothy. The first clarification I would like to make before I expound on what competency-based curriculum is all about, we actually did not start with the lower secondary curriculum, the lower secondary level per se. Competency-based curriculum started in 1997 when we were reviewing the primary school curriculum. The thematic curriculum is actually competency-based. So implementing it in secondary is actually a continuation. It started in primary, okay? Now we implemented it. Of course, it may not be a replica per se, that everything will be the way how it is done in primary school. Where we extended it to lower secondary, and we are going to extend it. We have started on the process of extending it to A-level.
That's good.
But as I indicated earlier, because of changes in technology, because of change, society needs change over time. So you must regularly review the curriculum. That's why we're going back to primary. But it actually started in primary. Now, what is competency-based curriculum? As you have asked Timothy. Now, competency-based curriculum, firstly, emphasizes learning by doing, which the panelists have been talking about. All of them are talking about learning by doing. The competency-based curriculum is learner-centered as opposed to teacher-centered. The system we have been having in the country is where the teacher knows it all. You can only be a good teacher if you can be able to go on the board, go in front, and power material. So learning is driven by the teacher. Now with competency-based approach, learning is driven by the student or by the learner. So a learner must be able to innovate, take advantage of materials that are available in the local environment to do learning with facilitation and guidance by the teacher. We are talking about acquisition of life skills, acquisition of values, which Professor was talking about, Ndebesa. Values of honesty, values of integrity, values of appreciating and protecting the environment, so that you bring out a learner who can fit in society, a complete person who can fit in society. And then, of course, there's a component of vocationalization of education, such that you study, and while you're studying, you appreciate the relevance of what you're doing to solving society problems. So that's what competency-based learning is all about. But it's very important that the context of competency-based learning in Karamoja, the examples the teacher uses, the materials which a teacher uses in Karamoja have to be different from the materials which somebody uses in Kapali.
That begs an assumption that the teacher has been equipped to be able to deliver what you ask.
But what happens to the national exam?
No, but let me just say one thing. We are not discussing rocket science. It has been there. We've had alternative basic education for Karamoja since the 90s, where the textbooks referred to problems within Karamoja, where parents and guardians would choose to enter the class to see how students in Karamoja were being taught, where the school moved with the crowd. But but of course, at some point they had to navigate as they went higher to get into that. And government came up with that because they realized that Karamojong kids would have to begin with roles like looking after the calves in the morning. And if they did not give them that chance, they would drop out of school, because looking after cattle was very important. And this is in the 2000s. It's not very far. You can Google alternative basic education for Karamoja. So the school was starting at 11, up to 3, because you look after the calves, you let them join the crowd, you come into the school. If the cows are here today, the school will be here. If the cows are in Kawempe, the school will be in Kawempe, and the teachers were trained to move with the crowds. So the government has implemented this in recent times. It's called ABEC. Google it.
But
alternative basic education for Karamoja.
Timothy, the question is, when you do all that, great. When it comes to assessment,
And the national exam.
national exams, you subject all these kids to one
The
what?
same thing. Yes.
The same
That's
exam.
where the problem is.
So in other words, you're doing greater things, but you are shooting yourself in the feet. So what do you want this child to do? When they drop out of school, and you start with almost 2 million kids, primary you are about 800,000, 300,000 senior 4, and then 97,000 senior 6, then who are you going to blame? So sometimes we are going to have policies. The number one resource that we have, the asset, I think the Honorable former Minister of Finance would agree with us, is the human capital of this country.
Okay. Professor Ndebesa, let me bring you into this conversation. You and I yesterday really hinted on a few things there. UPE came in, numbers shot up into the millions. Let's give an example of the past PLE that has just come out. Assumptions are between 5 to 7 million showed up in P1, 2017. We had only 700 plus finishing. Numbers dwindle when you go to secondary school, A-level, and go to university. Do we still need really national exams? Do we still need 20 years of school in these current times?
Thank you for that question. Those are contradictions in our systems, and they are dilemmas. Dilemmas are those issues that don't have easy answers. So let's not even assume here that there are easy answers, but let's have also channels of dialogue, channels of expressing our views, and see how to overcome such problems or reduce them. Anyway, we may not overcome all the problems that they go, but reduce them. But let's not have a monopoly of one group or some groups to think that the solutions are there. For the foreseeable future, I think the assessment of exams, national exams, I can see it will still continue. So how can we make good use of that situation that is very complicated and poses a dilemma? Yes, on the question of enrollment, access now, it is curious. I don't know whether government is taking serious study to find out what happens in terms of dropout. You start with 3 million, but those who do exams are less than 1 million. And when you continue, the 3 million that started in P1, by the time they are in senior 6, you only have 200,000 or something like that. There is a problem of access. And in most cases, it is also disadvantaged families and disadvantaged regions. That's why I was saying that we have to have education plan and system to make sure that it is inclusive. And that one we must do. But on the question of assessment, I think we need to invest a lot of resources and time and intentions to see how also curriculum, the assessment is done. Sometimes there is a mismatch between curriculum and assessment, between teaching and assessment. About more than 20 years ago, I don't remember when, we used the UNEP used to have examinations panel. I was on that panel. That panel, what we would do, after exams have been done and marking has been done and even results have been out, we would meet. I was on the history panel. We would meet and look at the exam setting, the questions, whether the questions were commensurate with our expectations. I remember we would even apply the Bloom's taxonomy. If it is HSC, you see whether it is following. Some questions are dealing with recording, others are dealing with understanding, others are dealing with application, others are dealing with analysis. Of course, we wouldn't go to creativity at that level. And then we would give the report to UNEP. From nowhere, UNEP said we don't have funds, and we seized it. So UNEP is not assessed. Even the examiners need to be assessed. Even the setters need to be assessed. Now we have started the competence-based curriculum, and we are excited. I am not saying, let me not be misquoted, that it shouldn't be applicable.
That's great.
But let's not think that this is something that has started in Uganda. In fact, about 2 months ago, I was reading Botswana started it in 1994, and they were critiquing it. In the last elections in Kenya, actually the population was saying, let's drop the competence-based curriculum. Did you hear it also? That means it had been started elsewhere, and there are challenges with it. But let's start it and continuously also assess that the competence-based curriculum. Let's not get excited and think that competence-based curriculum is going to resolve all the problems. I know it is education or a curriculum that is behavioral based, and we have missed it for a long time here. Critical thinking in this country is missing. But then we need to integrate. I think it should have an element of integration. Integrating different knowledge systems, different disciplines or subjects. Yeah? But here, unfortunately, we are not integrating. He has been a governor in governance at the university. Professor Sarah there knows what is going on in Makerere. There is disciplinary tribalism. What do I mean by that disciplinary tribalism? Each discipline wants to teach alone. You find people in social sciences who are teaching political science, they don't want a student to do history. You find somebody in a medical school doesn't want a student to know what is happening in veterinary medicine. You find somebody in veterinary medicine doesn't want to have anything to do with agriculture. There is this disciplinary tribalism that we must address. You know, problems are now similar. You don't have to say, because somebody is doing IT or is doing software engineering, therefore he has nothing to do with human resource management. You know, this IT you are studying, this IT, and you are going to develop apps. Apps are supposed to solve problems of employment, of ghost workers, of ghost payments. And the ghost payments are done by those ones who do human resource management. So let's not have disciplinary tribalism. And therefore, you in curriculum, this competence-based curriculum should also address integration of knowledge. Let's not continue with this disciplinary tribalism that for me, I must do this. When I'm in sciences, I shouldn't do arts. When I'm in arts, I don't do sciences. Problems of society problem solving curriculum, I think we are doing it, problem solving. Problems do not remain disciplinary here for the viewers who may want me to reduce it. A discipline, when we go to higher levels, the subjects, we call them disciplines. So I was talking about subject tribalism. that you see, me, I am studying mathematics or computer science, and I don't relate it with sociology. No, problems that mathematics is trying to solve are linked to sociology. Sociology is linked to physics. Physics is related to engineering. But in universities, we have that disciplinary tribalism where physicists don't want even to deal with engineering. Can you imagine? Mathematics, some people look at mathematics as a subject different. I saw in the papers, was it today or yesterday? Some colleges, these other tertiary institutions, they have dropped mathematics, and they are doing even technical work. They don't want to study mathematics as a subject. But mathematics is the mother of those technical courses.
Okay.
So I am recommending that we should move towards integrating knowledge, not continue with this disciplinary or subject tribalism.
Thank you very much. Dr. Surma, lastly, before we take a break, multifaceted challenges being spoken about, some really within our reach, some really not within there. But if we're to achieve transformative education in this country, if you were given an opportunity to make some reforms, where would you start skinning this elephant from?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate what my colleagues have contributed. I'm learning a lot. Education doesn't stop. First of all, I think it's important that the attitude we take is not that education solves all the problems that the student is going to face. On the contrary,
No.
we are preparing an individual to serve society and to serve themselves. So I think that's very important, especially at the primary level, for example. There's some basic skills of reading and writing and adding and multiplication that are very important skills. And say, it has been said that we should help the child to know that 5 plus 5, you're talking about cattle, 5 cattle, plus 5 cattle makes 10, fine. But the basic skills that we would like virtually every citizen to have. I get overwhelmed when I go to buy sumbusa, and I remember going to buy sumbusa in the supermarket, and I bought 2, I think, which was 1,500, and I gave 10,000 to the seller, and she will for a calculator. I said, now really,
Something that
you can't multiply 1,500 by 2 and 3,000, know that my balance is 7,000. So we want our children to have some very basic skills. So there is some commonality, in my opinion, in terms of what we would wish all our students to have. There are some, as the Professor Ndebesa said, there are some basic values we'd like to impart to our children, like communication skills, for example, being able to write and so on. Now, these are very, very important. Now, unfortunately, I was in the Prime Minister's delivery unit. We were looking at service delivery. And one of the problems we found was that after 6 years of UPE, we did a 10-year study. About half, roughly half, of the pupils would pass the literacy and numeracy tests. The other half would fail. In other words, you have taught someone for 6 years and they can't read and write. And they can't do basic arithmetic. So that's a failure of the system, because these skills are very basic. We want all our citizens to have some very basic skills. But beyond these skills, I think the question is one of preparing our citizens to be able to negotiate to life, to be able to face life circumstances. I think it was Ford, Mr. Ford, who said that education really begins after school.
True. Exactly.
You start facing problems. So what we are doing is preparing our children, not that we are giving them so much information, when they come they can solve anything. No. We are merely preparing them in terms of attitude, in terms of willingness to face the challenges and difficulties, and some basic skills, so that they can keep learning, continue learning, And indeed, I remember I was in America for some time, and you graduate with an MBA, and you are hired by, you are offered a job with Citibank or whatever. The first thing they do is take you for training.
Exactly.
But you say, I have an MBA, I have passed never mind. They take you and they start teaching you how their systems work. And that learning continues. So, to me then, the ability of an individual to have the skills that will enable him to keep learning and facing the world is perhaps more important than saying that it's measuring as if you have filled a basket of so much knowledge, now you have passed.
Actually, to complement that one, we call it learning how to learn. Because the world is so changing very fast.
It's so complicated.
That what knowledge you have got today, 10 years from now, or even 3 years, it will be relevant. Therefore, when you are given the skills of learning how to learn, within 3 years you will again learn.
And
that is
continue
where we
learning.
are missing, learning how to learn.
Continue learning. And then the point of is tribalization of subjects is a very important point, because we are, I think that's where the British approach differs from the American approach. In the American approach, I went to study finance in America as an undergraduate. I found myself being forced to do philosophy.
Exactly.
I said, but why? They said they didn't even want to talk about it. That's required, so you have to do it. So I did it, and actually enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I did it. So there are certain things that you need as a human being. Mathematics is not enough. You have to deal with human beings. You have to deal with, you have to communicate. You have other skills you need.
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
Strategic thinking.
Yes, so it's not just specializing, and you are not a machine which only does one thing, only grinds maize. You are a human being. You have to go in meetings like this and communicate and get along with people. And if you don't have those skills, then the quality of our society will not be as good as it should be. So these are very, very important. We have to, therefore, really critically define what we mean by education and what we want this education to do for Uganda in the face of the enormous challenges that we face in terms of employment, in terms of law and order, in terms of violence, in terms of discipline on the roads. What kind of human being are we producing? And what changes do we need to make? This is not something that I believe can be done by the Curriculum Development Center. It's the whole society. And that's why we have faith-based institutions, we have non-faith-based institutions, we have different religions that are teaching different things, but we have to find a way of having a unity in terms of what kind of Ugandan we want to see, and make sure that those basic skills, those basic qualities are being imparted into the citizen, so that the quality of life of Ugandans will improve in the future. And this, I believe, I don't think that we have reached that point of yet of defining the Uganda we want and how we're going to get it.
And that's very important as we take this break to define what country we want, what Uganda we want, but also something very critical, what kind of human being do we want at the end of the day, from an infant to an adult in this country. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be discussing this and more on how transformative our education should be. This and more after this break.
Fred!
Osmosis.
Freddy! Fred Dollar, my boss, CEO Inojo, the general of generals, the conqueror of conquerors, the first and the final, the sky above the skies, the promised land, the terms and the conditions, the international king crocodile, the source of the Nile.
I don't have money today.
Just take a polite loan of 200k to stock my shop. The signs and symptoms of success. The bank commander, not the bank teller.
Why hassle for a loan when you've got MTN Momo? Wesotinge. Use the Momo app or dial *165*5# for all quick loans. Choose from the different loan options from our partners and get one that works for you. Together, we're unstoppable.
Nyati
And the Bureau of Statistics is calling upon all stakeholders such as the Chief Administrative Officers, City Mayors, Resident City Commissioners, City Clerks, City and Division Councillors, Wards and LC Chairpersons, as well as the residents and business communities to cooperate with the UBOS field teams as we embark on advanced preparations to conduct the National Population and Housing Census on the 10th of May 2024. The census will be a 10-day exercise to obtain statistical data and information that will be used for planning and policy formulation, including information on 1. How many we are, 2. Where we are, 3. How we are living, 4. What we own, and 5. Where we access services from. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics has now started listing of households and mapping in the 11 cities of Arua, Fort Portal, Gulu, Hoima, Jinja, Lira, Mbale, Masaka, Mbarara, Soroti, and in the Greater Kampala comprising of Kampala, Wakiso, and Mukono districts. For more information, please call 0755 342 128 or 0773 342 128. This message is brought to you by the Executive Director and Census Commissioner, Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Census 2024. It matters to be counted.
Nyati Motion brings you
Metu Bus Industries, Namamve, the manufacturers of buses for transporters, schools, tour operators, and special purpose vans and any customized vehicle. Metu Bus Industries offers a range of buses known for safety, comfort, and reliability. Depending on your needs, a bus can simply be a point A to point B people mover with just seats, or a special design that includes power outlet, Wi-Fi, television, refreshment center, and any other specification. Buy your buses from Metu and support industrialization of Uganda. Contact us on 0788 118586 or 0782 030303. Email us metuafricabus@gmail.com. Visit our website www.metubusafrica.com.
ebiseera by'okuzaayo abaana mu masomero tebiteekwa kukaluubiriza n'akatono. Eno kusimba nnyiriri mpanvu kano kalipagano ka bidduka. Simanya kuzunga na banka siripisi. Kati osobola okusasula school fees z'omwana wo ate n'okola n'ebirala ntoko ku ssimu ye ey'omu ngalo. Ekikola kyangu nnyo. Nyiga bunyizi *165*8 ogoberera ebikulagiriddwa oba okozese app ya MTN Momo. Ate kati okola ki olwaleero? MTN Mobile Money Uganda Limited erungamizibwa banka enkulu eya Uganda.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangwe. So even as we get to this last leg of the show, we're discussing everything transformative education in this country. Can it be changed, especially looking at some of the strides we're making? Are we making them in the right direction? We have an education commission review that is going on. We also have a competence-based education that is happening to the O levels. They'll be sitting this year and want to know the impact there. Let me introduce the panel again. Professor Sarah Sally, Dean at the School of Gender and Women Studies at Makerere University, Dr. Lawrence Muganga, who is the Vice Chancellor at Victoria University, also the Acting Director at the National Curriculum Development Center, Dr. Irumba Richard with us, Professor Ndebesa Mwambusia, who is a historian and a don of history, Dr. Professor Ezra Suruma, a former Chancellor at Makerere University, former Minister of Finance and an economist. We're discussing everything education here. Let me read some of your feedback because it's overwhelming, it's a lot. Let me get to some of it here. Semanda Francis from Fort Porto. Transforming our education system should start right from nursery. Government has left pre-primary education to private players who are handling it in rudimentary ways, characterized by unrestrained teachers, poor facilities. Government should regulate this. As the new competence curriculum starts from the middle secondary level, it should also have started from primary. A lot of effort should also be put in minimizing examination malpractices. Thank you very much. Gomisi Vicent from Ibanda. Professor Ndebesa will translate for you these words, and if you do not understand Runyankore, I'll pass this piece over to Professor Ndebesa. Musoke Charles, a teacher at the primary level. He's here. He says, Dr. Richard's truth be told, NCDC does not set principal basics of the many different writers of the different textbooks. Why don't you at the NCDC look back to the textbooks that were nationally and uniformly made, Okelo 1, 2, and 3, for example? You also have let so many incompetent writers sell their books on the market. Okay? Lastly but not least, Kiprotich Philip from Buko. My concern is the designers of the new curriculum did not cater for all the learners, with the majority of those in hard-to-reach areas are left out. They did not think if all the schools have the resources needed to implement the curriculum. In fact, it's affecting most learners, causing the learners to have a high dropout rate there. Finally, I have Mivule Ronald here, a regional integration activist. Thank you, Timothy, for the show. Why should we teach children things like Canadian Paris, micro screw gauge? If we effectively implement the things Dr. Lawrence is talking about or proposing, we would have a huge decline in the unemployment rate in this country. We need to sell his proposal across the country, entirely in the East African region there. Keep the messages coming through. We'll be discussing those and more. But let me get to Professor here. Professor Sarah, two things that really strike me that someone has mentioned, especially on the privacy of education. I think it's going to be a twofold question for you. One, how do we find the balance between the economics and the social service, especially giving an example of a country like Seychelles, which has a very limited private school playing in there, but most of it managed by government. My second question is, should we have government take over such social services? Over to you.
Wow, those are indeed very difficult questions. I think as a country we took a direction in the late 80s, early 90s to go private. And now it has gone for a long time that way. I don't think you can bring back education to be all fully public, okay? But of course that comes with challenges, as I said. You know, we talked about the children and being produced like factory products. The other dimension you need to think about is the teacher. Right now, results are back. While parents are running, teachers are going to be on the chopping board. Because if a certain school did not produce certain number of fours, the teachers to be blamed. And the teachers are very professional. The teachers are trained to know that children are endowed differently, but the owner of the school is counting the number of fours so that he or she gets more in, and that also helps them to repay their bank loans. And so it is not that education is separate from the economy. It has been so much because it's a commodity now. And people, so now that is true. So now you're asking, what do we do about that?
The balance between the economics and the social service.
I think for me, why we cannot roll it back, what we need, government can still regulate the sector. And that's why we have people like NCDC. I think it should play, and the ministry, they should play their role in regulating. I know once in a while they have tried to regulate things like when you have school fires, they come in and regulate how are the living conditions and that when there's been a calamity. But it is high time they also came in to regulate the curriculum. This thing of celebrating schools with 4s as the top performers, and therefore you get the examiners from there, the setters from there, we are simply compounding a problem. And I think that's why I'm very hopeful about competence-based. I know it's an expensive system to run, but I'm hopeful that at least when we change the grading system, we shall relearn what we lost. So government cannot entirely take over. There are reasons why socialists, that by the way, the other things you can't forget in this country or in any country, there are things which come in like population dynamics also come in and matter. We are among the youngest countries. No, the country with the youngest population. So you also have to factor that in. And government, with our kind of economy, cannot produce on its own enough schools to accommodate all those children. So there's a role for the private sector. But the private sector can also be guided and regulated to do things professionally. Not to put teachers on pressure. Kids begin morning prep at 5 a.m. when they slept at midnight. And the teacher is there also teaching the whole day. And so the situation is not good. But it can be back. And then just one comment that someone said, why teach Canadian prairies to Ugandan kids? There is a value in comparison. That's why what colleagues have said before, what is it we want to teach? What skills do we want the Ugandan child to come out with? Critical thinking, strategic thinking, writing skills. So those should come. So the problem is when we only teach Canadian prairies and we don't teach about the Ugandan savannah. But if you're going to teach Canadian prairies and wheat production and compare it with where else they're producing wheat in Uganda, I know they produce some bit in, I think, Kapchorwa or whatever. So there's a value in comparison. You can compare Uganda with Kenya, but you can also compare Ugandan agriculture with other parts of agriculture as of picking lessons. Our problem is only teaching what is happening there. We copy and paste instead of contextualizing it and therefore saying what is our problem. And lastly, whatever we do, as long as our children have not learned to identify with the context. By the way, you can be in a space and not be in the space. As we said, our people are studying what is the latest occurrence in Gaza, what's the latest occurrence in the US, which musician is doing what, who is dating who, and who, I mean, there's a time when the Kardashians was a very big craze, what is football? So they are bombarded with a lot of information. You ask them, okay, in the recap things, what did Wankulukuku play between Wankulukuku and Cheva? And no one knows. And no one even wants to know. So unless our kids are plugged into the system, to know that this is the Ugandan problem, therefore let me innovate with that Ugandan problem in mind, there will be nothing. And interestingly, the community which is doing that at the level which is not very high in education, the artisanal people. That's why if your machine is not working, you pass via Katwe, via Musa Bode, and then they will try to find a bolt here. Our mechanics who fix our cars are not very highly educated people, by the way. But they will try and error and do. Of course, we would wish them to be highly sophisticated, but they are not. So we need to have a population that understands the problem. And then the education system works with that problem in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you defined something there that Dr. Suruma talked about, but we'll get back to that, especially defining what kind of education we want as a country moving forward. And that's why I want to come to you, Dr. Lawrence. Before we even get into these reforms and what informs the reforms and what your recommendations are, it's something that really bothered me that someone asked. The competence-based curriculum and your recommendations had to reach places. Child is seated on a brick, writing on the ground. Are these recommendations, can they translate to a place like that, where the ratio of 1 teacher to 500 children there, is that possible? And define what kind of education we need as a
Thank you, Timothy. Very good question. Let me, earlier you asked Professor Suruma to skin the elephant, and he did a great job. Let me even try to collect the skin he put aside and also hide it, just take it away from there. When you look at our education system, I think it is no longer good enough for us to hide behind a curtain called that this is too much. We are biting so much than we can chew. Okay? We want us to remember, and I'm inviting everyone here and all those people who are watching us from their respective homes to remember that there was a time we didn't have even this thing we are talking about. And it has been put in place, much as it has its own areas of improvement, but it was not there. So that means we have to have belief in ourselves and trust ourselves that we can actually create an education that works for us. Okay? So now, what is that kind of education? We need to first believe, actually, also understand that education is a public good. And it must be right for everyone. Now, whichever education you take, but can we have it as a right? Can it be a public good? And who provides public goods most of the time?
The state.
It is the state or government. And where resources are not enough, then we start seeing things like the PPP, or trying to do what? To talk to the private people to come in. But again, at the forefront of this entire affair is the state. So, are we going to see a time when the private sector is out of education? Government may not need to even tell them to exit, but once the state does its job, the private sector will take itself out. Okay? Now, look at, we have started what we call the competence-based education. And let's be fair. This model works. It is great. And let's even try to break it down for the person watching us to understand it. Some people define it and say it is learning by doing. Yes, great. But let's say this is when every child is empowered to have particular competencies. Every concept you learn, you have to demonstrate mastery, that you have actually mastered this concept and there are competencies you have and particular skills, and then you can move forward. Competence-based education is not about the time you spend in a particular class, but how much have you mastered a particular concept and then demonstrated that mastery and then the skills, and then you move forward. So that means it is no longer, it does not require us to cherish so much what we know, but we have to cherish what we can do with what we know. That is now the world we live in, meaningful education. So now if you asked me to look at this country, the only solution that we have that will address everything we are talking about here is we have to agree that time is now when we have to take education to the owners, the people, from wherever they are situated. And only then people will pick interest in the education that matters for them. And that's why I have said clearly, and I will repeat it here, that we love UNEB so much. It is great. It has done an amazing job. All of us, we are products of UNEB before we became anything. We have NCDC. It is doing a great job. But time has come for us to also think of creating, for example, I earlier talked about the school districts, right? Can we also create the district evaluation boards that are able to assess the education that happens in their very school districts? Now, we are going to have something called, another version of something called, you can call it anything, and I've recommended it to be called, say, a research, evaluation, assessment, and development agency. Very slim, but full of professionals that can provide quality assurance, research, helping the district evaluation boards, creating different frameworks that they can use to provide better assessment of anything that is happening in their districts. And I'm banking on the NCDC to work with the school districts to create curricula or a curriculum that addresses the needs of those people. And then, of course, when I say
So
that
it's tailored to them.
that is tailored to them, that's when you create an education that matters for these people. When you are using competence-based education, by the way, when you implement well competence-based education, it factors in what the integration that Professor Ndevesa talked about. Because you're talking about kids learning, using project-based learning, for example, right? And they are able to teaming up, they are communicating, they are agreeing to disagree, they are learning the common things we need in real life. So when, a particular school district that has a tailored curriculum and another one existing far away from this, it doesn't mean that they are isolated. They are also disciplines, as put by Professor Ndevesa, that they are never going to change. Mathematics doesn't change, technology doesn't change, but how you teach it to make it relevant to these people is what is going to change. Right?
Dr. Lawrence, let me ask a question.
Yes.
ChatGPT.
Yes.
AI.
I was coming there.
I want to ask, in Kampala,
yes,
I will get coursework from Professor Sarah. I will look and refer to different things. I will even have a summary, an app to summarize all these things for me. But a child in Busia,
yes,
Sophia, where I come from,
Thank you. Now,
how is this competence-based?
This is where, now remember, this is what I told you earlier, that the moment you create these school districts, and the curriculum tailored to them, and you understand that education is a public good, and we prioritize education, empowering all the teachers. If you prioritize education, that means also resources should do what? Should follow, because this is the most important resource we have. But also remember that the curriculum is going to be addressing what they do on a daily basis in their places where they live. So eventually, government is going to really invest in these resources. It's education we are talking about. We need everyone to be educated. We just need to prioritize that. So, but I want us, Timothy and the viewers, to remember that much as we are here, and I like what Professor Sarah said, that we can blame the colonizers all we want, but they left. Okay, they left us with this curriculum and we are still holding it dear. But when the industrial revolutions were happening, 1, 2, 3, 4 today, for us we are not active participants into those industrial revolutions. Right now, we have one that is unfolding in front of us. America has positioned itself to continue that supremacy. Professor Suluma can tell you, he has lived there, he has worked there. China is also rivaling their supremacy. Saudi Arabia is winning itself away from now oil, going into technology, because they know the oil will not be a thing in the next 10, 20 years. Now, the only way we can also have a competitive advantage and somehow try to decolonize our curriculum, to decolonize our education, is also to start investing in technology, the artificial intelligence you're talking about, such that we don't become consumers when these people are doing what? So when we are talking about education that is meaningful, plus everything else everyone has talked about, technology must be key. And there is one important thing, and members here may agree with me, may not agree, or the viewers, that is going to continue ruining our education system and our own people. I want you to think today, we are talking about problems society has, okay? And there are so many. And we want these kids we send to school to come back and solve these problems. But look at the setting where we are sending them. We have something we call boarding schools, right? These boarding schools have played a very, very significant role in trying to alienate these children from the society they come from. And we were talking about what meaningful education is all about. Now, if you get a child, you place them in some confined space for the next 16 to 20 years, and the only time they have to interact with their community is only 2 months a year. And when they come, they confine themselves in rooms somewhere and be on their own. If they are in Kampala, these places you talked about, they are on video games and everything. And then they get night outs or whatever, like home visits with other fellow students. These kids have been created to become professional dependents for the next 20 years they spent in school. And you want them to graduate and come back to society. And then the country is going to depend on them. And you want the country to expect them to solve the problems that the country has. It is not going to happen.
Very interesting.
The countries that have emancipated themselves, you allow a child to come to the community and understand how to interact with people who have seen it all. Professor Suluma here. A child who is in a boarding school will never understand what Professor Suluma knows, what Professor Ndebesa knows, what Dr. Irumba knows, or what I know. They will stay on their own. That is the generation we have created. And if we look at the demographic dividend we would have expected as a country, in the 70% of the young generation, we are losing that, just like that. So, boarding schools, we need to think twice. Tailoring the curriculum to the region and making sure that the students are studying what matters to them. It is very, very important. Making sure that assessment is continuous assessment, and teachers are empowered, scrap PLE and UCE, and making sure that Senior 6 is also assessed at the District Evaluation Board. 50% competence-based curriculum and continuous assessment, 50% can be within that very region.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Lawrence, enlightening on the dependence there. Dr. Irumba, coming to you. What so far, since 2020, February there to date, what impact has this competence-based curriculum had so far? What milestones would you tell us?
Thank you, Timothy. The competence-based curriculum has had, amidst the circumstances within which it's being implemented, amidst the limitations and constraints within which the curriculum is being implemented, the curriculum has had very significant impact, I could say. The Ministry of Education and Sports, through the Directorate of Education Standards, carried out an assessment. And the report is available. The impact is great.
Share with us some stories.
I'm going to share, of course, I'm going to share. And they were looking at the performance of learners who had gone through the curriculum, comparing them with those who have not gone through the curriculum. Some of the achievements is that the school dropout has reduced, meaning that the learners now are more interested to keep at school than keeping out of school. Communication abilities have greatly improved. The ability of innovation, actually the projects which learners have come up with are amazing. I will give you a simple example in my home. Actually, I've taken a very long time without buying soap to clean the house and to use and in the washrooms and other places, because we have a child who has gone through this curricula, and one of the things they were taught was how to make liquid soap. So she does it, and that's the soap we use at home. That had never been heard of. So the impact is great. The journey is a long one, but we have already started, And as a country, we can't take a step back.
True.
There are challenges we all appreciate. You talked about teacher training. As the National Curriculum Development Center, using the resources that are available, we have been able to train up to 35% of the teachers in the country on the new curriculum. Meaning that the other 65 are not yet trained. Now that's a gap. You talked about access learning materials, textbooks. It's a challenge. Some schools have received, others, have not yet received. The textbook to student ratio probably is still limited, not what we expected. So we need to avail and provide these learning materials in schools. We need to improve the infrastructure in the schools. Classrooms. The classrooms need to be configured. We are talking about student-centered learning.
And that's where my question is, Dr. Richard. The children want to stay. Dropout has really decreased. The teachers have a challenge of economic times. But also the teachers, what is the incentive to keep them there? The other one was teacher-centric. They knew they were needed. Here, their need is not so much.
And that's where I was going, Timothy. The motivation of the teachers is very, very important. And also we need to correct the impression that the new competency-based curriculum does not need, a lot of input from teachers.
Yeah,
it's a very wrong
that's
perception.
wrong, yeah.
We are saying the teachers are facilitators, they have a lot of work to do. Actually, they are needed even much more than how they were needed previously. So we need to empower the teachers, and we need even to increase the number of teachers in specific areas, especially the vocational related and practical areas. Either we need to retool and retrain our teachers, or to recruit and have more teachers in some of those specializations.
My follow-up question to you, Dr. Richard, is on the expense. When we look at Botswana, when we look at Kenya, countries that have taken on this competence-based curriculum, it's been expensive. The localization of this curriculum is also expensive. Into languages for people to be able to understand, textbooks to be there. Where is funding coming from?
Of course, as I have indicated, it's a journey as a country we chose to take. I should say really it's a very good one. It was the right decision to change our education system. And anything good comes at a cost.
True.
So we need to be prepared to invest in the education sector. Education is a responsibility of all of us. There is a role which has to be played by the government. There is a role which must be played by the parents. And there are roles which must be played by the learners themselves. So the funding and support should not only come from government. There are responsibilities by all the parties in the education sector. But I agree with you, it requires substantive resources. But a number of countries have done it, including countries in Africa, and they have been able to do it well. We can also do it.
Thank you very much. Professor Ndebesa, if you were to be part of the reforms or the recommendation to make reforms to our education system, before I get to the reforms, let me get to the donor fatigue. You and I have talked about the World Bank. One of the biggest donors in this area or in this sector of education seem to be fatigued in the way we're going around in circles. How do we make education self-sustaining in this country?
Thank you. You are almost appointing me to, to the ministry. But let me first say this one, that whereas we are saying this or this at the technical level, there is a question of political governance. Ultimately, political governance is the one which allocates resources, both human and financial, and makes policy decisions at that higher level. So we have to bring them on board For example, is the Parliamentary Committee on Social Services in respect of education are aware that these processes are ongoing, and therefore when the budgetary allocation is being discussed, they would see where to allocate these resources. There is a question of incentives and disincentives. Sometimes are people appointed on management committees or whatever the case may be based on merit? Is there meritocracy? Because if I am a very good teacher, a committed teacher, and I'm learning these competence-based systems and whatever, and somebody is promoted over me, one who doesn't even know, then those ones who are below will just be discouraged. So there is the bigger picture of political governance of these courses and allocation of resources. That goes even to the World Bank. Do we have people committed in the ministries of education, those who negotiate some of these deals? In the Ministry of Education, in the Ministry of Finance, do they internalize global legal systems, global policy systems, global institutional systems, global normative systems, so that they engage? There is also down at governance of these programs at the lower level. We have got management committees, I think in primary. We have got boards of governors, some PTAs, because all stakeholders must be brought on board. How are they convinced? Because you may run a competence-based curriculum and the PTA or the parents or the management boards or boards of governors are not brought on board. There is also, there could also be a mismatch. You are beginning the curriculum reform at O level, but the people to teach at O level and the graduates are from the university. Is the university brought on board? Because the university should also be integrated and know that there is this curriculum reform going down, so that tertiary institutions, universities, also know what is going on below. Otherwise, we shall have this compartmentalized. I hope that is English.
Yes.
You know, some of us learned English after sleeping in houses without ventilators. Compartmentalized reforms. You reform at primary. You have not reformed at college level, at the students level. You have not reformed at different schools of education. They are not on board, but education doesn't also teach content as such. Do other departments of biology, of history, of chemistry, of geography, are they also brought on board, so that we know that we need to reform our education system along the competence-based curriculum? You pass through some of the exams, questions that are set, say at university level, you find they are actually not aligned to the competence-based curriculum we are talking about, or they are not even aligned. You find 8 questions set. There is no question that is looking at application. There is no question that is dealing evaluation. Most of them might be at understanding. So it needs to be a national system, so that we bring people on board. But I want to make one last comment. I have heard about this saying that we could have certain districts, certain regions have their curriculum. I am not against it as such, but there is a contradiction, there is a dilemma there. Are people going to be employed in that district? We are talking about employment now abroad. We are talking about Saudi Arabia. We are talking about people going for Cheyo. We are talking about people employed in Kampala, where there is a higher level employment. So how do you teach, impart knowledge to learners for their local conditions when the world has become a global village? I mean, let's be realistic. Most of the employment that is given to high level value employment in Uganda now is given to graduates who have studied in international schools, who have studied abroad, who have not studied in Uganda. And it is now going to those children whose parents can afford to take them to international schools, take them abroad to learn from there. So you find the Ministry of Public Service or Public Service Commission, they and other people who employ, they tend to look for people who have studied from Cambridge, from Harvard, from wherever. So you end up localizing the syllabus in Guru, but the employers are in Kampala, especially high value level employment. And the universities and the university courses are not based in those villages, in those districts. So it is a contradiction. We have to find a fine balance to see how this learner is the future of this learner. Is it localized? But also, as we said, as I finish, we said education is a public good. I agree with those who have said it is a public good. And one of the functions of education is national integration, because we still have a state that is, we still have a country without a nation. So if you teach localized knowledge, localized experiences, how will you have national experiences to create a nation state? Because we don't have a nation state. I normally use a computer metaphor. We have a hardware with a malfunctioning software. How do we do it? Those are contradictions that we need to look at, debate, and find a way forward.
Thank you very much. Lastly, Dr. Suruma, let's put it, we've finished the hardware. Now let's get to the software. What productive Ugandan do we want? As saying, we have discussed a lot of the hardware. Let's discuss the software. What productive Ugandan do we want as a country? At the end of the day, Timothy is born. What are we looking for when he's 22, 23? What would that definition be for both local context, national context, but also the global context?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure I can answer it, but it must be answered. It's a question which must be answered. I believe it involves a national debate, a national conversation. Maybe that's why you have commissions like one of Amanyam Shega and so on, to get views from all sectors. But at the minimum, there's kind of a minimum requirement, in my opinion, that we would expect. For example, that every Ugandan citizen should be literate and should have some numeracy, be able to read and write, and to do some competency in adding and his money and getting correct change and so on. Some very, very basic things. Basic communication, but citizenship, some basic knowledge of what a good citizen should behave in terms of law and order, in terms of social responsibility, in terms of family management and responsibility. That surely we would like a country where a citizen, and I think, let me say this also, not only in terms of character or values, as Professor Nevesa put it, but also survival. Survival skills.
And social skills.
Survival skills are critically important, notwithstanding what Professor Nevesa said earlier. We, and this maybe that's where the politics come in, we have to have some kind of a debate. We want every Ugandan to have access to basic requirements of life, to have food, and to have shelter, and to have clothing, and to have access to medicine. So there is a kind of a minimum standard of living that would wish every Ugandan to access. I went to Germany some time back. I was writing a paper on social security. And the director of social security in Germany said, for us, it's not acceptable that a German citizen should live in a subhuman state.
Exactly.
I would wish to say that about my country. I would not wish to see any Ugandan living in a subhuman state, eating from the dustbin. So there is a certain standard of living I would wish to see every Ugandan access, that every Ugandan can access food. That's a national standard, but it's kind of a minimum standard. Education, of course, contributes to our producing that standard. We want every one of us to be contributing to the creation of an economy whereby this social security is available to every Ugandan, irrespective of whether they're in Karamoja or they're in Kacherere or in wherever. They should have that minimum standard of life. Then the other requirements of law and order and so on. Of course, this is, we can have laws, but if they are not written on the heart of our people, if I don't believe that I should respect Professor Ndebesa, and if he looks that way, then I can grab whatever. Then the character of our people matters a great deal.
They are actually also called laws, but unwritten laws.
Yes.
They are norms.
The
norms
norms
are unwritten laws.
Yes.
They are written on the hearts of the people.
And this part of the education, that's why the question about kindergarten is important, because from the very beginning, and the question of kindergarten, the question of boarding, what kind of character
are you nurturing?
Are we creating? What kind of citizen is coming out of this system? And before we know it, we can't negotiate our way on the road, because we are producing people who have no concern for each other.
Correct.
It's me first. If you die, that's your problem.
True.
We can't afford that kind of citizen.
Yeah.
So, but now I thought I should mention that at the other end, Professor Ndebesa was talking about the university, the knowledge and the systems that we teach, I believe, when Professor Nawang talks about Makerere being a research university, a knowledge university, the knowledge is being produced there. We don't want to be depending on foreign universities and foreign researchers to tell us what to teach. We want to be producing our own knowledge of what we believe is best for Uganda.
Exactly.
I would prefer that the students of economics are reading my textbook rather than reading one written by somebody in Australia. It's because I know something about this country and I have it on my heart.
Yeah.
So the universities have to help us in producing the content that we are going to teach. Because when you go as a graduate teacher to teach in secondary, you've been through Makerere, you've been through Chamogo, you've been through Victoria. What did you learn there? Did you learn anything about Uganda, or you're all talking about Canadian prejudice?
Exactly.
And that's what you are bringing down. Rubbish.
Rubbish. Yeah.
So
not only knowledge, but also methods, which we call
Pedagogy.
pedagogy. The methods of teaching that suit our circumstances.
And the content.
And that is very important, because even when they are teaching local knowledge, how are they teaching it? Many of our students who get in university today have not studied the prairies and the type. They have learned a very Ugandan thematic curriculum. But it is interesting how little they know about Uganda. For those of us who teach things like politics, social studies, gender, You tell them these things happening in this country, even on a day-to-day, and kids are shocked.
Okay. Gentlemen and ladies.
But it was something small.
Hold on, Doctor.
Yes.
Because I've run out of time, so I'm going to give you parting shots. So please include this comment.
Yes.
I will start with Professor, I'll go on to Dr. Lawrence, Dr. Richard, Professor Ndebesa, and finally Dr. Sruma. Professor, over to you.
Thank you very much. The discussion on education can never end. And as we said, you are being trained to be a useful human resource, but also to be a useful citizen. This journey begins with the question of identity. Who are you? And what country are you being prepared for? This question is a question of ideology. Curriculum is not just about education. Curriculum is about producing a certain kind of citizen who must be anchored in a particular ideology. That then shapes their identity. So it means know your history right, know your geography right, know your context right. I don't know how much history people are learning today, but if they don't know where they are coming from, they can't know where they are going. So I think it's very important as we are doing all this, it is important that we define who we are as a people and anchor the future generation in the context in which we want them to serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Very profound there. Dr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Timothy, and every member here. I'll just quickly throw a little bit of a simple clarification to my senior colleague, Professor Ndebesa there, about trying to customize, regionalize kind of education. This is not, it's not happening, it's not new for Uganda. No. Professor Sruma can tell you what happens in different states in the US, all right, and their opportunities that they have. Canada, different provinces. It does not stop a child from becoming a national asset, okay? So in our situation, teaching mathematics when you are in Moroto does not change when you are in Chisoro. Just because you used different examples, it doesn't happen. But you are only helping to make it more understandable, more relevant, more kind of associated to this child to be able to understand how they can use that knowledge in their own local environment. But to really end this, I would really want to call upon all of us. I always tell people keep pointing fingers to government. All of us, we are government. I don't want us to have this excuse. We should be very, very courageous and ready to disrupt this system. We know it is not working. If you want to know signs that it is not working, look at our universities, different universities. You graduate someone who has sat in a classroom for 3 years or 4 years with 0 years of experience. They come out to the labor market, and the labor market wants 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of experience. What other explanation are you looking for? Or you sit down a child from primary one, their handwriting, you are even beating them for poor handwriting, and sometimes you even switch them from the left hand to the right hand just because you want them to write very well, only to finish school. And the employer is requesting for a report that is typed.
Okay.
So we should understand that change is needed. What we are teaching today needs to be really, we need to rethink this. And it is for our own good, for a better generation.
Change is a constant. Over to you, Dr. Richard.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you, panelists. And thank you, viewers who have been patient and followed our discussion up to this stage. As we conclude, my parting comments are brief, but 3 points. One, education transformation is a responsibility for all of us. It's a responsibility, and as I indicated earlier, by both parents, government, children, society, and even universities and other training institutions. As Professor Ndebesa put it, the universities and training institutions need to change curricula as well, so that the teacher they produce, okay, is compliant with the changes we're introducing at a lower level.
Exactly.
Secondly, educational transformation needs sound investment. by government. So government needs to commit sufficient resources in the educational transformation journey. And then lastly, as National Curriculum Development Center, we developed several materials, and they are available free of charge on our website. So we're encouraging viewers to go to our website. I'm going to mention it, but you can even search where technology compliant. You can search NCDC and you'll get the website. But for those who are able to write, our website is www.ncdc.go.ug. www.ncdc.go.ug. There's plenty of material, including material on early childhood education, which some viewers mentioned.
Thank you very much. Professor Ndebesa.
Thank you. The greatest skill I think we should impart or facilitate our learners to know in this era and century is learning how to learn. However much you get facts, even if you get information and facts, 100 facts today, they will be irrelevant in 3 years' time. But if you have learned how to learn, you will learn more facts by yourself. So we should invest our energies and our curriculum in having learners learn how to learn. I want to end also by talking about university education in Uganda, or tertiary institutions education in Uganda. I wish we would introduce a foundational course to be done by every student called critical thinking. Because learning is about critical thinking. So if we could have 2 hours in a week for every student, whether you are doing social sciences or engineering or medicine, critical thinking, I think it would do a service to this country's education.
Thank you very much. Lastly, Dr. Ezra.
Thank you very much, Timothy. Thank you very much, viewers. I think that we are talking about survival at an individual level and at a collective national level. The education is to give us skills that will enable us to survive as an individual, to be able to obtain the basic needs of life, and conduct my life in a way that is proper. And at the same time, as a country, we want an educational system that is meeting our collective needs. That means that the leadership of the country has to have a visualization, a vision of how the needs of the people of Uganda can be met, and design an education system which meets those needs.
Exactly. Yes.
So the problem is, can Ugandans, do they have food? Do they have clothing? Do they have a home? And what kind of education system must we have in place so that they can produce the food and the homes and the clothing that we need as a people? So we have to find a solution. We know the problem. We need to meet these basic needs, and of course survive in a civil manner, in a lawful manner. But we have to provide, these are basic things. Once we decide, we know the problem, then the educational system must be designed to solve that problem. But it's about survival.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Let me read some of the feedback that has come through. Gad says, to Dr. Irumba, 2 questions. Why did we take long to transform our education system from the Cambridge system since 1986? Why did NCDC start competence-based curriculum in lower secondary school when the foundation is primary level? I think universities and tertiary institutions waste a lot of time and resources talking about critical thinking and innovation when we have lost a country at the primary level, okay? Derek goes on to say, can't we have an education system where students rate the teacher's performance at the end of each term? Interesting. Minister of Education can track students' understanding of the subject through their teacher. Obua Isaac, I would like to agree with Professor Ndebesa. When you say the values should be given a special place on our education system, as a human race, we may not need to strain our brains with finding cures to death, for example. Instead, we find simple needs to learn to live joyfully and to live together in a limited lifespan. There's also a time when Uganda was referred to as the happiest people in the world. Are we still the same?
Yeah, we
okay.
are.
Dr. Nathan says, I pray that the stakeholders embrace the new competence curriculum. In 20 years, it will yield results in our country. We need to develop tools of assessment, not the current theoretical exams. Universities should stop promoting and acknowledging short courses because they are skill-oriented. Such graduates in short courses should be recognized and use their papers to advance their skills. Lastly, Innocent Tumwesime in Bushenyi. All the panelists went through the just overhauled curriculum. The doctors who treat us when we are sick, the teachers implementing the new curriculum, our bankers, lawyers went through the same. What is lacking has called for an overhaul, and how will this enhance international, regional competitiveness of Ugandan graduates? Review does not mean a must change, okay? Gentlemen and ladies, thank you so much for coming through. We really appreciate you sparing your time to be able to stand with us here. But today we'll end it this way with a question. Who is in charge of our national curriculum? Don't look elsewhere. You and I are. Good morning.
Yeah.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Well, welcome everyone to the biggest game on the continent.
And you have to. You've got to just seize those moments and enjoy them as much as you possibly can.